Well, good morning, Golden Corner Church, and good morning to anyone who might be visiting with us today. I enjoyed our worship service this morning, and maybe the word enjoyed is not the right word that I should have chosen. I was moved by our worship service this morning. I appreciate the fact that you're in church. I'm tickled to death that I'm in church with you, but I think most of all, I'm so grateful that God is in the church with us today. He makes all the difference. I want to do sermon number 4 in a series entitled Fear Less. And if you're visiting with us for the first time, here's what we're doing. We're studying the Bible together to learn what it has to say about fear, so that by the end of this series, I can't promise you'll be fearless, but I really believe, if you'll hang with me, that we're all going to fear less. So are you ready to study the Bible for a few minutes together? Good deal. I love the enthusiasm. Well, let's just do it. I want us to look at a story found in the Old Testament book of Numbers, chapter 13 and 14. If you've been around church long, you've heard this story. You're going to be familiar with it. Matter of fact, if you've been at Golden Corner Church any length of time, you're familiar with this story. It revolves around the Israelites. I think it's pretty common knowledge. They spent about 400 years in bondage, serving as slaves in the land of Egypt. And if you can believe it, you know, in the beginning, their relationship with the Egyptians was a great thing. And it served some very constructive purposes. But at some point, it went sour. And the Egyptians began to oppress and mistreat the Israelites to the point that they made their life almost an unbearable misery. And the Israelites began to pray to their God, will you do something to get us out of this situation? God heard their prayers, decided it was time to answer their prayers. And so the first thing he did was he called a man named Moses and said, I'm going to deliver my people, and I want to put you on the point. But not only am I going to rescue them from their bondage to the Egyptians, I've got a special treat in store for them. I'm going to give them their own land. And this is the way he described it, a land flowing with milk and honey. In other words, it's spectacular. It's just perfect for people, you know, an agricultural people. It's going to be perfect for them. So Moses goes into Egypt. He shares that with the Israelites and said, you know, this is what God's going to do. He's going to rescue you, but he's also going to give you this place of your own, this very special gift. And so God, through Moses, successfully rescued the Israelites, and they found themselves standing at the threshold of a wilderness they had to pass through to get to this land. And God not only got the Israelites out of Egypt, he got them all the way through the wilderness, and they found themselves at the very border of this wonderful land that God had promised to them. And then God spoke to Moses, the leader, and said, here's what you're going to do next. I want you to select a leader from each of the 12 tribes of Israel. And I want you to send them into the land on kind of a reconnaissance mission. I want them to go in and gather data and then come back and report to you. And so Moses selected his 12 spies, the Bible calls them, and he sat down and briefed them and said, here's what I want to know. I want to know about the people who live in that land. Are they few or many? Are they weak or strong? Do they live in open camps or fortified cities? I want to know about the land. Is the soil fertile or poor? Are there trees? If so, how many trees? I'd like to have samples of the fruit. This was the season, the time when the grapes were ripening on the vine. He said, if you could bring back some samples of the fruit, that would be outstanding. So they went into the land and they spied it out for 40 days. And they came back to give their report to Moses, and I believe that some Israelites gathered around. Probably there were quite a few in anticipation of what these men were going to say. And a spokesman for these 12 men stepped up and said, this land is a bountiful land. It indeed flows with milk and honey. It's spacious, it's fertile. You know, for folks like us who depend on agriculture, I think the possibilities are endless. Now, if you were perceptive and you were in that crowd, you would have noticed something odd. This man was sharing that report with no sense of excitement whatsoever. Just kind of matter of fact. You have probably been thinking to yourself, what's the deal? What's the deal here? I mean, if it's everything they're saying, where is their excitement, their enthusiasm, their joy? Where is it? Something must be wrong. So, they continued. Look at verse number 28. But, you see that? Oh, listen. We don't know that the half's been told about how good the land is. But, and I want you to notice where his focus is. But the people living there are powerful. And their towns are large and fortified. We even saw giants there, the descendants of Anak. He said the Amalekites live in the Negev. Let me tell you what, now he's broken this land into regions. And he's saying in the region known as the Negev, the Amalekites live there, and they've already tangled with them once. They know what they're dealing with these people. So you got the Amalekites in the Negev. He goes on and he says this, the Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites, more of these fierce, large, powerful, warlike creatures or people, where are they at? They live in the hill country. The Canaanites, these are bad, bad people, while they live along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea and along the Jordan River. What he's saying is, the land is absolutely filled with these powerful people living behind their fortified walls and their fortified cities. They're everywhere. Lots of them. Now, this guy is not speaking for the entire group of 12. He's speaking for himself and 9 other guys, because 2 of the guys who went in didn't feel the same way this guy felt. One of them's name was Caleb. Now, he's obviously studying the crowd, and he begins to notice that they're kind of murmuring and talking among themselves, and he senses a mood shift here, that things are not going in a positive direction. And so he feels compelled that he needs to say something. So he does. Look at verse number 30. But Caleb tried to quiet the people as they stood before Moses. Look at what he said. Let's go at once to take the land, he said. We can. I love the way he said that. We can certainly conquer it. Now, that's a lot of confidence talking, but that's also a lot of courage talking. He saw everything the other guys saw. And he's like, let's do it and do it now because we can. Well, look what happened. Verse number 31. But the other men who had explored the land with him disagreed. Look at this. We can't. We just can't go up against. Notice where their focus is at. I want you to notice how many times they mention God. We can't go up against them. They are stronger than we are. So they spread this bad report about the land among the Israelites. The land we traveled through and explored will devour anyone who goes to live there. All the people we saw there are huge. We even saw giants there, the descendants of Anak. Next to them we felt like grasshoppers, and that's what they thought too. In other words, if we try to tangle with these people, they're going to crush us like a bug. And we know that. And what's worse, they know that too. You know what these 10 guys were saying to the Israelites? The land is everything God said it would be, and maybe even more. I don't know that we fully understood how good it was going to be. However, the challenge to take the land is too great for us. The problem here is insurmountable. You know what they're insinuating? We ain't going. And so they began to tell people this. The Bible said that night, if you were anywhere in the camp of the Israelites, if you listened very closely, you turned the radio down, cut the television down, if you listen closely, you could hear somebody crying. People everywhere were weeping. You know why? This was a major disappointment. The thought of having their own land, I believe, had helped them, sustained them while they're getting out of Egypt. I'm sure it sustained them when they're moving through the wilderness. Listen, we can put up with all this junk, all this stuff. We can work our way through this because, man, we got something a whole lot better waiting on us. And all of a sudden, guess what? That's not true. they're not going in the land. What a major disappointment. Here we are on the backside of nowhere, and that's not going to happen. And pretty soon, their disappointment turned to resentment. There had to be somebody to blame. And who do you blame? You blame whoever's in charge. And so they began to, the Bible said they lifted up their voices in a chorus of resentment toward Moses and Aaron. Now, I want you to look at something they said, chapter 14, verse number 3. They said, why is the Lord, first mention of God, right? Did you catch it? And I want you to notice that there was enough blame to go around here that you could give some to Moses, you could give some to Aaron, but you could dump a whole lot of the blame on God for the situation they found themselves in. They said, why is the Lord taking us to this country only to have us die in battle? Our wives and our little ones would be carried off as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to return to Egypt? You see what they're saying here? They're saying we know the outcome before we even start. We know the end of our story if we attempt to take this land. All the men will be killed. That's how it's going to end. And our wives and children will be taken as slaves for the rest of their lives. That's how the story ends. You know, I find that interesting because the other morning I sat down and I thought, I wonder how many times before this God had told them how their story would end. Now, it was early in the morning. And I was reading in Leviticus. So I may have missed a few, but to the best of my ability, 18 times before the spies went in the land, God said, let me tell you how your story ends. I'm going to give you the land. I'm going to give you the land. I'm going to give you the land. I promise. That's a word he used. I promise I'll give you the land. Matter of fact, it was called the promised land. He said, I'm going to give you the land. I swear it. I swear my name on a solemn oath. It's yours. Done. Signed, sealed, wrapped up, ready to give to you. I made it a part of an agreement, a covenant I've made with your ancestors. The land is yours. I know they're big, tough people all over it, but here's what I'm going to do. I'll whip them for you. I'll run them out of there for you because that land is yours. Go in and enjoy it. All of a sudden, 18 times, they've come to the conclusion, well, that ain't the way this is going to play out. We're going to be killed and our family's going to be slaves. And they said this, I think the thing we need to do is choose a new leader and just go back to Egypt. Moses and Aaron heard this and they knew we're in a mess. We're in a God-sized mess. And so they fell on their faces and I believe they began to pray. Well, here you got Joshua and Caleb. And they're thinking, I think we can reason with these people. Perhaps, we went in the land. Maybe if we spoke to them, we could make a difference. Now, listen to me because we're going somewhere, guys. Hang with me now. So Joshua and Caleb speak up. I want you to look at this. They said to all the people of Israel, the land we traveled through and explored is a wonderful land. I think they're saying, hey, we're all in agreement on this. This land is spectacular. Now, look where their focus is. He said, and if the Lord, where's their focus? Man, it ain't on the people. It's on God. If the Lord is pleased with us, He will, you see in this confidence, He will bring us safely into that land and give it to us. How could they say that? Because 18 times God said, I'll do that for you. They got it. They were remembering what God had promised. It put their focus over on God. Because their focus was on God, they had faith. Because they had faith, now they got courage. These guys are thinking completely different than the other 10 and now the rest of the nation. He goes on as they go on to say this, it is a rich land flowing with milk and honey. Do not rebel against who? The Lord. They're still focused on God. And then they identify the heart of the problem. Don't be afraid of the people. What's the problem here? Fear. Don't be afraid of the people of the land. They're only helpless prey to us. How differently? The 10 said, we're helpless against them. These two guys said, oh, no. They're helpless against God. Because God has promised to help us. Look, he goes on to say this. They're helpless prey to us. They have no protection. In other words, they're the ones that ought to be afraid. They're the ones that ought to be running for cover, not us. Why? Because the Lord, look at this, but the Lord is with us. Don't you be afraid of them. Well, how do you think these people responded to this resounding speech? I mean, it's pretty moving. How do you think they responded? Do you think they say, well, we need to rethink this? These guys got my attention. I never thought about it in the way they presented it. And I'm kind of seeing things. How do you think they responded? You know what they said? Gather up some rocks. I think we need to beat these two to death before we get this new leader and head back to Egypt. Well, about that time, somebody showed up. You know who it was? God showed up. Now, I don't know how he did it, but he made his presence known to the community. They knew God is here. And God showed up so that he could speak up. He had something he wanted to say. Look at verse number 11, chapter 14, 11. And the Lord said to Moses, and I noticed he wasn't on speaking terms with the people at this point. He said, how long will these people treat me with contempt? Will they never, you seeing that word? What is that word? Believe. We're seeing what the problem is. Why didn't they have courage? They didn't have faith. He said, why will they never believe me even after all the miraculous signs I've done among them? I want you to think about this. They didn't believe that God was with them. They didn't believe he was going to help them. They didn't believe he could do anything. They didn't believe any of that. In spite of the fact that they had God's word 18 times, he said, I'll do this. And despite the fact that they had seen with their own eyes that he's with us, he helps us, and he can do anything. In spite of all they had heard and seen, they didn't believe any of it. And that's where their fear came from. So he said, God said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to kill them all. You ever had that thought in a traffic jam or at a shopping center, staying in line? Well, God had that thought one day. And he expressed it to Moses. He said, I think there's a simple solution here. Back out of the way, son, because I'm going to kill every last one of them. And we'll start all over, and I'll build a nation with you. Now, how do you think Moses would have responded? You know what? He's a class act. He's a better man than I am, and I'm going to bet he's a better man than you. You know what he said? God, please don't do that. I'm going to beg you, if you would, not to do that. And I'm going to paraphrase. It's kind of a Hodge paraphrase. I ain't worried about them. God, I'm worried about you. And I'm worried about your image. Because there are a whole lot of eyes watching you and watching what happens here. A whole lot of unbelieving eyes. And he said, they're going to assume that you had the power to get these people out of a jam. You got to have the power to get them through difficult times, but you didn't have the power or the ability to get them through the land. And what would the people think of you? So I'm thinking of you. And he said also, you know, you're a God of mercy and second chances and forgiveness. And so I'm going to ask you to do this. Will you forgive them? You know what God said? Oh, matter of fact, I want you to see. You know, God said, okay, deal. I forgive them. However, look at verse number 21, chapter 14. He said, but as surely as I live and as surely as the earth is filled with the Lord's glory, not one. How many think he meant by this? Not one. Not one of these people will, what's that word? Ever enter that land. They've all seen my glorious presence and the miraculous signs I performed both in Egypt and in the wilderness. But again and again they have tested me by refusing to listen to my voice. They will never even see the land I swore, you saw that, to give their ancestors. None of those who have treated me with contempt will ever see it. This is what God said. Yeah, I'll forgive them. But I'll tell you what, this deal about the land, off the table. Not a day. Not one day will they step footed and enjoy it. Not one of them will ever see the other side of the river and see what they could have had for the entire course of life. He said, Moses, tell them, turn around tomorrow and start away from it. And he said, here's what we're going to do. He said, I'm going to let them wander in the wilderness a year for every day the spies were in the land, for 40 years. And I'll let this generation, any of these people who are 20 years age of above, who are old enough to make an informed decision, old enough to be responsible to make a decision, they're going to die in the wilderness. And then you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to give the land to Joshua and Caleb because they were different. That's what he said. They were different. And I'll give the land to the offspring of those who were too afraid to take advantage of it. So Moses goes and tells the people, they're distraught. They're like, oh man, I tell you what, we've changed our minds. We want it. You know what God said? Tough. That's tough. You know, because here's where we're at. You lost it. And then God sent a plague on the 10 men, and those 10 men who got all this negativity started, who spread the fear, you know what? He sent his plague on them, and those guys died dead as a stone. You say, wow, what a discouraging message you have brought us here today. Now, there's a lesson here about fear. And it's a big deal. And I got all kind of time. You know what the lesson is? Fear robs. Fear is a thief that robs. Take these people, for example. God was giving them an extravagant gift. After 430 years of slavery and bondage, God was not only giving them their freedom, He was giving them their own land. And what a land it was. Spacious, fruitful, a land flowing with milk and honey, a land better than anything they could ever imagine. And God was giving it to them. Here it is. The Israelites followed God out of Egypt and all the way through this unforgiving, harsh wilderness. They followed God right up to the point that He said, okay, here's the land. And then they refused the gift. I'm not sure the word refused is the best word to use to describe what happened. I think the Israelites were robbed. I think that with the exception of 2 men, Joshua and Caleb, an entire generation of Israelites was robbed of God's gift. What made the difference? Joshua and Caleb had courage. The rest were afraid. And fear robbed them blind. Why were Joshua and Caleb courageous? They believed with all their heart that God is with us. He's going to help us and He can do anything. That's where their courage came from. They had faith, and faith unlocked their courage. On the other hand, we just read in the Bible that the rest of the Israelites didn't have faith. They didn't have it. In spite of all God had said to them, the promise He made, swearing to them, I'll help you, guaranteeing them, I'll drive the people out, I'll take care of them. In spite of all that, they did not believe that God was present, faithful, and able. They just didn't believe it. They had no faith. Therefore, they assumed we got to fight these people on our own. And that produced fear. And fear robbed them. Fear robbed them of God's generous gift. Fear not only stole God's gift from them, it never returned it. It took it for good. Here's the lesson we're going to learn today. Fear robs. Fear is a thief that robs, and fear is such a skilled thief that it can eternally rob us of God's greatest gifts. Did you hear me? Because we're about to wade into some stuff. It's about to get real serious. Fear is such a skilled thief that it can eternally rob us of God's greatest gifts. I need to talk to some people here this morning. I don't know who you are. I don't know how many I'm speaking to. But I'm talking to somebody here who's not a Christian. You've never accepted Christ and been saved. Now, you can look back over your life and you can identify at least one time in your life where you were really close. You were so close to making this commitment and accepting Him. I don't know what happened, but you started thinking about life, death, eternity, heaven, hell, God, you. And you started thinking, man, something's missing, I need something, and perhaps you started going to church, and you went to church a few weeks, a couple of months, I don't know, but while you're at church, something strange began to happen inside you. You felt this inner compulsion. I mean, there was something like a light bulb that went on your head that said, that's it, that's what you need to be saved. You felt drawn, I need to do this, but before you made that real commitment, you know what you did? You backed off. You backed off at the last minute. And then, man, you ran the other direction as hard as you could. That's happened to you at least once. Some of you, it's happened multiple times. Months, years passed. Next thing you know, you're thinking about it again. Life, death, heaven, hell, God, you, sin, forgiveness. So you go back to church. I want to explore this again. And you go to church for a few weeks or a couple of months, and the next thing you know, you're having this experience again, like the light bulb goes on and something inside you. It's like it's got a hook and you pulling you, saying, you need to come to God. You need to receive Him. You need to do this. And man, you get so close and you're right at the point you're going to make a commitment. You go, no, I'm not doing this. And you back off. You leave the church again and you run hard in the other direction. Why do you do that? I think I know. I think I know what makes you do that. Fear. You say, why would you say that? Fear, that's the impact fear had on me. Most of you know my story. I wasn't raised in a Christian family. Seldom ever went to a church. When I was, 13 maybe, I don't remember my exact age, my sister went to church every Sunday. And she begged me and pleaded with me. She really harassed me, wanted me to go to church, and to just kind of get her off my back, I went. My mom dropped us off at the church. Teresa and I went into the church. After church, Mom would come back and get us. And, I did this for a few Sundays, and, I'll be honest with you, I went to Sunday school. Hated Sunday school. I got to be honest with you guys. I hope my Sunday school teacher's not here or listening to this on the podcast. I got nothing out of Sunday school. It was the most boring thing I'd ever endured. Then we'd go out, we'd listen to the music, and oh my God, I only thought Sunday school was boring. And then you listen to music, but my sister, I got to keep her off my back. There was this one Sunday, my little pastor was I called him little, his name was Roy Spearman. He's about that tall. And Roy was up there preaching, and I never understood anything Roy said. But man, while he was preaching, something happened to me. It was like a mini awakening. And I'm like, that's what's missing in my life. God and I are all out of sorts. And it's my fault. And He wants things to be made right between the two of us, and I need to do that. And man, I tell you what, I just like, and I could feel it. I don't know how to describe it, but if you've been through it, it's kind of like something inside you's going, you got that right. That's what you need now. You need to do this. You need to do it. I felt this incredible draw, to step into this and do this. And then the preacher said, I tell you what, if you're sitting out there and you feel like you're ready to be saved, here's what I want you to do. I want you to stand up. Stand up where you're at. Stand up. I'm thinking, what? And I want you to move, work your way down to that aisle, and I want you to walk down here in front of all those people. I want you to get on your knees here in front of all them. Let me tell you something, guys. I am an introvert. It's not that I was an introvert. I am an introvert. That scared me. And so I began to fight this feeling. No. I fought it till I could get in my mama's car and get off the property. I thought a little bit about it that week, but the feeling dissipated, and I thought, I'm okay. I'm cool. It's all right. So go back the next Sunday, and you just endure Sunday school. You endure the music. Roy gets up and starts preaching, and here we go again. Ronnie, this is what you need. Ronnie, you can't just keep putting this off. You need to be saved. Why don't you go? Man, Roy, is there somebody that want to be saved? I'm thinking, me? Okay, here's what I want you to do in front of all these people you've never met, you don't know. Stand up. come down. I was terrified. I'm like, I can't do that. Man, I fought it till I could get in my mama's car and get off the property again. And then, this went on for 2 or 3 Sundays, and I'm thinking, I can't live much longer like this. I'm going to have to do this. And this more fears surfaced. I had this fear of ending up like my grandpa. I say this with all due respect. My grandpa was a devoted Christian man. He loved God more than I've ever loved God. But my grandpa made a horrible mistake. He let religion dilute his relationship with Christ. And he had all these crazy, wacky rules that he lived by that weren't in the Bible. And I tell you what they did. They effectively stole his joy. And he was the most angry, bitter person I'd ever met. And when I would think about becoming saved, this voice would whisper in my mind, you'll be just like your grandpa. I'm thinking, oh, God, I'd rather go to hell than be like my grandpa. I'm serious. I was scared to death. And then there was this voice would go, and can you live it? This is what I thought, really believed this. I thought all Christians were perfect. And to continue to be a Christian, you had to stay perfect. And this was my concept of God. And I thought if I commit to Him and I take a step off the straight and narrow, this is what God does. He's right behind you with a bullwhip. You get 6 inches off the line, whap across the back. You know it? And every time that's what God does. God beats the fire out of you until you're doing what He wants you. I thought, I can't do that. And I was a teenager, and I really had one horrible habit. I cussed like a sailor. As an adolescent, every breath I drew, I cussed. That's what we did at school. We cussed. That's how we communicated. So I had this thought. I'm not going to commit to this until I can see that I can live this. So one Sunday, I made it home from church. All that pressure, inner pressure I felt to get saved, I made it home from church. And I said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to try to go all week without cussing. If I can do that, I'm going to commit to Christ next Sunday. Well, guess what? By Monday morning, I was cussing like a sailor. Never went back to church. Fear robbed me. You know why you've been so reluctant to just put your life in God's hands once and for all? You know what's keeping you? Fear. There's something about being a Christian that scares you. What is it? Are you afraid you'll lose friends? You might. Are you afraid of change? Because you're probably going to change some. Are you afraid of the unknown? Because God leads us by faith, and oftentimes we don't know where He's going to take us the next day. Are you afraid of sacrifice? Because He may ask you to give some things up. Are you afraid of just relinquishing the control of your life to someone else, even if it's God? I'm absolutely convinced that I'm speaking to somebody here, and fear is already robbing you of God's greatest gifts. If something doesn't change, let me tell you what's going to happen. You're going to be robbed of a relationship with God. Do you know that's what Christianity is all about? Is you and God being one again and enjoying each other's company and building a relationship. Fear is absolutely trying its best to rob you of that. And if you die and you never accept Him, you know what it means? It means you missed having a relationship in this life, and you're going to be separated from God for eternity, which means eternally you never knew God. Fear is trying to rob you of a life that Christ died, that you and I could be living. It's called a full life, a rich, satisfying life. And Jesus said, I came so you could have that life. It's a quality of life we can achieve on our own, can't even comprehend. It's not a life that's full of money or things, but it's a life that's full of peace and joy and contentment and relationships. And right now, fear is robbing you of that. And if you die having not accepted Christ, it effectively robbed you of that permanently. And then after this life, there's heaven. For those who are saved, you understand that fear is trying to rob you of heaven. If you die having not accepted Christ, if fear can talk you out of this, then it robs you of a relationship with God, a full life on this earth, and eternity in heaven. And guys, there's no parole. I'm going to say it plainly, okay? There's no parole in hell. In other words, if I suffer for 1,000 years, maybe I'll get out on good behavior. And I'll get a second chance to know God, to live a full life. No, sir, listen to me. Fear is such a skillful thief that it has the ability to rob us of God's greatest gifts eternally. And you know how serious this service is? There's somebody here, and that's happening to you. It's happening to you. And I feel like you're at one of those places in your life where you're close. And I do not want fear to rob you another day. Not another day. Certainly not eternally, but I don't want fear to rob you another day. I want you to understand why you keep pulling back and running away. It's fear. You know where the fear could be coming from? It could be coming from the devil. You know, I know we Christians have got a bad habit of blaming everything on him, but in this case, some of your fear could be coming from him. We learned last week that fear is a weapon that the devil uses to keep anyone from doing what God wants them to do. Well, who do you think put it in my mind? You'll be just like your grandpa. Where do you think that came from? That's my enemy. Saying, I know what to keep him away. Just tell him that's the way you end up. I'll tell you, he'll run hard the other direction, and I did. And there's a voice whispering in your mind, you'll never have another minute's fun. You might as well just hang it up and wait on death. That's what the Christian... Listen, I think some of the fear is coming from enemies. Some of it comes from the people you surround yourself with. There was a whole nation paralyzed with fear, and I got 1 minute to wrap this up. You ready? It's going to be some speed talking, baby. I'll tell you, so you better pay attention. This whole nation allowed fear to rob them. You know where the fear came from? 10 guys. 10 guys that didn't have faith. So all they had was fear. Their fear distorted their perspective of what God wanted. And they saw it as a negative thing, and they verbalized it. Sometimes your fear comes from the company you keep. There are people in your world that don't have faith, and their perspective of Christianity is skewed. And so they don't want any part of it. And I tell you, you've allowed their fear to affect you. And I'm going to recommend something here. I'm not saying you need to cut those 10 people out of your life, but I will say this. I promise you there was a nation who looked back and said, I wish we'd have never listened to those jacklegs. They misled us. Maybe you don't need to cut ties with them, but I promise you this. Somewhere down the road, there was a nation that said there were 2 guys we should have listened to, Joshua and Caleb. They had faith. Their perspective was accurate, and they begged us to do what God wanted. Listen, you need to open up your world and let somebody like that in, and if you look carefully, there are probably a couple of them already there. You need to let them be your influence and not the 10, because sometimes the 10 spread their fear to us. Because they're afraid to make a commitment to Christ, we're afraid. I'll tell you, third place. Sometimes fear comes from just not understanding Christianity, just like me. I got to be perfect. I can't do that. If I don't do that, God's going to beat the fire out of me. Where'd that come from? I didn't understand Christianity. I'm going to tell you the truth. As far as the standards of the Christian life, you can't measure up all the time. You won't. You won't. You can't do it on your own. But here's the truth. The truth is the moment that you make the commitment, God will be with you, He'll help you, and He can do anything. That's the part nobody ever told me. Nobody ever told me. You don't have to try it on your own. The day you sign on the dotted line, God will help you from that point on. Nobody told me that. I'm telling you. I'm telling you. You say yes to Him, He moves into your life, He's there to help you, and He can do anything, even help you live the Christian life. So here's what I want you to do. Man, this morning I want you to look fear right in the face and say, no more. I'm not listening to you anymore. I'm not listening to you anymore. I won't let you rob me another day. Certainly not going to let you rob me for eternity. No more. You know what I want you to do? Make a commitment to Christ today. Do it. You've been needing to do it for a long, long, long time. I want you to do it today. You say, what do you want me to do? I want you to stand up. No, I'm kidding. No, you don't have to do that. You know what my pastor didn't understand? You don't have to stand up, come down an aisle and stand here, but you don't have to do that. You can accept Christ on the creek bank, sitting in the back seat of the boat while you're fishing the bank, sitting in the truck seat. You can accept Christ right where you're sitting. So let's take that element of fear out of it. I'm not going to ask you to get up, come up, speak up. Got it? I'm not going to ask you to commit to going to church in any way. I'm not asking you for an offering. It's just as plain and simple. You've needed to be saved for a long time. Today's the day. I believe it. So I'm going to ask everybody to bow their heads and close their eyes. You ready? You want to accept Christ? I want you to pray this simple prayer in the privacy of your own heart. God, I'm sorry for everything I've ever done. That was wrong. For every sin, I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? Lord, I'm turning. Right now at this moment, I'm changing the entire direction of my life. And I'm turning the rest of my life over to you. And from this point forward, I'm going to do my best to follow you. I believe when Jesus died on that cross, he was paying for my sins. And what he did is enough. So I'm asking you, God, not because I'm deserving, but because I'm depending on Jesus. Will you save me? Look at me. Everybody, look at me. If you prayed that prayer from the sincerity of your heart, I'll tell you what he just did for you. He just saved you. He forgave you of your sins. He reconciled you to himself. You now have the opportunity to build a personal, meaningful relationship with him, to pursue this life to the full. Reservations have already been made in heaven for you. He just saved you. Now, I would recommend a next step. I didn't ask you to stand up, come forward, say anything. But I think it would be healthy for you at some point to make this public, to let people know of the decision you've made. And I think I know when you ought to do that, and I think I know how you ought to do that. I think you ought to do it on May the 20th by being baptized. Do you know what baptism is? It is a means. It's God's idea. It's a means of people going public with the fact that I've accepted Christ and I'm going to follow him. It's the way you do it without saying a word to anybody, but through your actions. That's what you're saying. And I want to encourage you. There have been a lot of people this year who have acknowledged, I've been saved, I accepted Christ, I've been saved. It's time to go public with that. I know what some of you felt when I said that. You felt fear. Oh, up in front of people, dunked in water, hair, Ronnie, I don't know. Hey, don't let fear rob you of that experience. I assure you this, I've never lost anybody in a baptism. We've never had to call out the rescue squad. You know, there have been a few I held down longer than others. Here's the deal. God has saved you. You need to glorify Him by going public with that. By being baptized if you haven't been. And so I'm going to ask you to, before fear settles in, you walk through these doors this morning, you go sign up for our baptism. Thank you, God. You're dismissed.